Hello. We've all seen how the genre of true crime has absolutely exploded the last couple decades, both in terms of the sheer number of books published, in terms of the quality of writing, in terms of the sheer range of fascinating subjects covered, perhaps most of all in terms of the increasing sophistication about human psychology and the dark intricacies of the human psyche and soul that true crime authors are bringing to explorations of their subjects. I want to look at the 15 or so works that, to my thinking, take us the farthest in exploring and gaining an understanding of the nature of evil and the nature of crime. I want to start with a work that strikes fairly close to home. 1980, Ann Rule published The Stranger Beside Me. Now, in 1980, I was a student in the Pacific Northwest, and we at that time were haunted by Ted Bundy's cutting his swath through the area. It came very close to home. My very first semester in college, in fact, the first week of my freshman year, someone pointed out the room across from my dorm room and said, "Hey, Donna Manson lived here." And upon inquiry, I found out that Donna Manson was at that time thought to be one of Ted Bundy's very likely victims. Donna Manson had been interested in the arts and interested in literature, well liked by other students. She was going through a dark period, but that's true of so many victims of serial killers. But the thing that was really haunting is that she disappeared on the way from her dorm room, which was right next to mine, to the Performing Arts Center. And that was a walk that I took every single day. So years earlier, she had taken the same stroll through this wide, winding concrete path through the woods, and she never arrived. Her absence haunted all of us. It was a life abrupted into nothing. It was the murder of hopes and dreams and the life that might have been. And it was the killing of one of us. Then, in July 1982, in the lush green, life-teeming environs of Seattle, Washington, the strangled bodies of young women started turning up everywhere. The first was 16-year-old Wendy Caulfield, found floating in Seattle's Green River with horrifying speed. The body count passed 10, then 20. Still, there were no likely suspects, no major breaks in the case. With each new body discovered came the horrifying certainty that there would be more. Now, for residents of Washington, like me, the discovery of each new victim raked an earlier wound. It had happened before, and it had been horrifying. And now the nightmare we thought we'd banished was upon us forever. Rage murders, rapes, disappearances, dismembered bodies. The long quest to put a face on the monster. And the truth, when it emerged, as Anne explains so well, as if swirling out of the depths of the primal horror, was as unsettling as it gets. He had not just walked among us, but he had flourished. He wasn't some night-creeping Mr. Hyde or a Bela Lugosi demon or some shy wallflower with a secret giving off creepy vibes. He had been an aide to the governor, a promising law student, a compassionate and skilled volunteer at a suicide prevention call center, a smooth-tongued and charming man of many skills who raised desires and envy in many, but not a single red flag. Adding to this horror, he had escaped from custody not once, but twice, the slippery boogeyman who, even after being caught, might smiling show up knocking at your very door. And it was worse than this, because 2 years prior to the discovery of Wendy Caulfield's body, an ex-police officer, Ann Rule, now a crime reporter, had published a true crime book that made each reader utterly rethink their world. If anyone had been trained to recognize evil, it was Ann Rule. She had trained as a police officer and flourished on the force. She had quit the force to write true crime stories for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. During her tenure there, she had come in contact with hundreds of psychopaths, sociopaths, bad seeds, people malformed with rage, diminished by drink or drugs, the artists of mayhem, and the architects of loss. Now we all know what comes next. The charming young man, the policewoman turned crime journalist who spent her days learning everything about psychopaths and brutes, charmed and perhaps even smitten by her handsome young colleague at the Suicide Prevention Center. Ted and her had become good friends, very good friends, and not a single red flag went up. Ann Rule's book transformed and intensified the horror of each new disappearance. Everyone was looking around at their neighbors, their friends, even their families with suspicious eyes, because the core horror wasn't that the killer could be anyone. The core horror, since the bodies kept piling up without a single good suspect, was that the killer could be anyone who no one would ever perceive as a threat. So with the discovery of each new body came a fresh raking of the wound of Ted Bundy and a deeply personal, uncanny, and dismaying horror. It had happened again. It was happening again. It had happened before. It was happening again. It could be anyone that no one would ever suspect. Donna Manson, Ann Rule, liking Ted Bundy immensely, working side by side with him, never suspecting that he was the architect of so much loss. Ann Rule, the stranger beside me,